So when you go out there and you take center stage at a place like Texas, all eyes are going to be on you. And if you listen to the early reports out of spring football, Arch is lighting it up. Hello and welcome to Always College Football. It is the final day of March. It is March 31st. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and we appreciate you being with us here on the ESPN College Football YouTube channel. Or if you're here with us via the podcast platform, please like, please rate, please subscribe to the show. Wherever you get the show, we very much appreciate the support that you guys have shown us over the last few months. Things have slowed down a little bit, and there's a lot of buzz around college football. We're going to get into some of the biggest topics of the week. Stanford just got a new coach. Let's talk a little bit about where Stanford's at. Okay, so we'll hit that. We're going to talk about some intriguing possibilities for the future of spring football. I think Syracuse and Colorado trying to mix things up a little bit. We're going to talk about several teams in the SEC. We'll talk about Alabama and their quarterback competition that continues to rage on. Talk a little bit about Tennessee. Can they get to double-digit wins this year? If you look at the schedule, might be more realistic than you think. We will also talk about Ohio State. Julian Sayin. It sounds like things have not gone great for Ohio State's quarterback, young quarterback, the guy that's supposed to be stepping in and have no drop-off whatsoever. Doesn't sound like spring is off to the greatest start. And then we, of course, why wouldn't we have a show where we talk a little bit about Arch Manning? We continue, like I said, to ask all of you guys, like, rate, subscribe to the show. It helps us. It continues to build up our numbers, and the more numbers we get, the more resources we have to create more and more content for you. So let's dive in. We will kick things off with Stanford. Not something you hear today here on Always College Football. So it's not often that we go into a show here on a Monday and we think to ourselves, you know what we should start with? We should start with Stanford. But we like to play the hits here at Always College Football. We have a tendency to navigate towards the teams that are going to generate the most clicks, the most buzz, and the most attention-worthy headlines. Why wouldn't we? We're in the business of numbers. So it's not often that we're going to lead with a team that doesn't get a ton of numbers, and that's Stanford. But there are a few aspects of what's gone down here in the last handful of days about Stanford's process that are applicable, I think, beyond that of what's going on in Palo Alto. If you are unfamiliar with what's gone on, Troy Taylor last week was fired. We don't need to go into the circumstances of why he was fired, but he was let go. Andrew Luck, by the way, maybe many know this, the former Indianapolis Colts quarterback and former Stanford Cardinal Heisman finalist. He is now the GM, who is not an athletic director, but is fully in charge and has complete autonomy over the college football program there at Stanford. So that is what's gone down here in the last few days. They have now decided to hire Frank Reich. Now, Frank Reich has been a head coach at both Indianapolis in the NFL and then also an unceremonious season at the Carolina Panthers, where he was let go rather quickly. Probably shouldn't have been, but it's beside the point. Frank Reich has never coached in college football, but there is a connection between Frank Reich and Andrew Luck. He played for Frank Reich, Andrew Luck did, in 2018. Now, that was his final year there in the NFL. He was there 18 to 22, and then in Carolina for 11 games. So that's kind of where we're at. They go with Frank Reich. It's a one-year deal at the moment. I think maybe just to bridge the gap to allow Andrew Luck some time to just assess the landscape. He's been new on the job. This all kind of went down rather quickly. But Stanford football will give you an update with kind of where they're at. They've really had 4 consecutive 3-9 seasons. The last 2 were under Troy Taylor. They are in a bit of a crossroads. They have challenges. They have all these other things, right? I was going to put together a list because as I was preparing for this show, I was going to put together a short list of candidates that I thought might be pretty good hires for Stanford. And then I realized quickly that Frank Reich's a guy, so why are we wasting our time? But we need to talk about, though, more than anything else, is where is Stanford right now in the current landscape of college football, and how many schools fall under this umbrella? I think Stanford, you can make a strong argument that it's another program, maybe it's Vanderbilt or Northwestern. I think Stanford might be in the most difficult situation in the entire country. I think it's the toughest job, or at least one of the toughest jobs, because there was a time where Stanford had kind of carved out a nice little niche for themselves. This was during Jim Harbaugh's tenure, and then that carried over, obviously, into a lot of successful seasons. They won a bunch of games. They won Rose Bowls. David Shaw did an amazing job after he replaced Jim Harbaugh, after Jim Harbaugh left to go to become the head coach at the San Francisco 49ers. So this has been a place that had won. But here's the problem. Right now, Stanford is competing in the ACC. Stanford already has a very difficult time attracting fans to come to their games. We've seen pictures on social media. I mean, I've seen the stadium where it honestly looked like a closed scrimmage within 20 minutes of when toe meets leather in one of their non-conference games. But you know what Stanford had going for them when they were at their peak? That was when the Pac-12 was at the time pretty dang good. Stanford was playing the likes of UCLA. They were playing SC. They played Oregon. They played Washington. They, of course, played Cal, and they'll continue to play Cal. But Stanford's gotten away from their footprint so significantly that their fans don't care about the teams they're playing. How many people in Palo Alto think, man, I cannot miss that game today at the farm? I can't miss that game when Georgia Tech's in town. They don't care about that. They want to play SC. They want to play UCLA. They want to go toe-to-toe with Oregon. The teams that they're currently playing don't move the meter. And when I know this, I know that if the stands aren't full, if you can't convince people to come to the games, how are you going to be able to convince people to write checks for NIL? I also know that Stanford supports way more sports than just about any other college athletic department in the country. So when they start looking at the House resolution that's coming here rather soon and the $20 million that is going to be allocated to the pay-for-play model that the House is going to vote on, or the House is passing, well, 75% of that $20 million is going to go to football, or at least it would in most cases. It might not at Stanford. And to make matters even more challenging, they're receiving about a 30% share of the payout that the ACC is generating. So I look at where they're at, and I'm comparing them a little bit to UConn basketball. Now, you're going to say, UConn's won 2 championships. I understand that. You'll understand the alignment and the parallels that I'm creating here. UConn basketball, for as good as they've been under Coach Calhoun and now currently under Coach Hurley, for as good as they've been, they had a bit of an identity crisis there for a little bit. Why? Because they left the Big East in favor of the American Athletic Conference. And when they were in the American Athletic Conference, they were playing against the likes of Tulane. They were playing against East Carolina. They had a home game against Tulsa. That was great, but they weren't playing the teams that their fans cared about. They wanted to get and see UConn play against Providence or St. John's or Villanova. Those are the teams that people want to see. You know what Stanford fans don't want to see? Games between Stanford and Syracuse. Doesn't make a difference to them because Syracuse is a non-traditional rival. So I think that they are in an impossible spot right now. And wherever they end up going with this hire down the road is going to be a fascinating one because I think Frank Reich's going to be there to bridge the gap. If he does a great job this year, that'd be amazing. I hope that happens. I want that to happen for Andrew Luck, who's a close friend, for Frank Reich, for Stanford fans, for Stanford football players. I want it to happen. I want them to have success. That'd be amazing. But I think this hire is going to have to be one that is very unique. And when I say unique, I'm talking from the end of a triple option. I'm talking, and if they don't want to go triple option, they want to go some hybrid version of the triple option, that's fine. I'm good with that. but you're going to have to bring someone in that is totally unique with what they do offensively or defensively. Because let's be real. Do you think Andrew Luck, former quarterback, former first overall pick, guy that made a living throwing the football, do you think he's going to want to bring in a triple option style of attack offensively? Probably not, right? So what do they need to do? They need to go out and they need to look in D1, D2, high school. I don't care where they go. Go and look and find the most innovative offensive mind in the sport. And it might be someone similar to when Chip Kelly got the job originally at Oregon and ushered in the tempo era where they played with supersonic hyperspeed. They're going to need to go out and find someone that is extremely different. A guy that might go for it on every single fourth down. A guy that only kicks onside kicks, and a guy that goes for two every time he scores. I don't know what the circumstances are, but they're going to have to completely deviate from the norm for Stanford to ignite interest in their football program, because I think they're in a really, really tough spot. But in the moment, Stanford has now gone with Frank Reich. That will bridge the gap. We'll see where it goes when we revisit this topic a year from now. Now, Frank Reich is just another former NFL experienced coach that is going back to college. We've seen this a couple times, where there's Bill Belichick, made the jump, obviously, from the New England Patriots to now the North Carolina Tar Heels. Now, Frank Reich, after being at Indy and then at Carolina, now he's at Stanford. We've also seen it at the coordinator ranks as well. Ted Monachino has now taken over as Maryland's defensive coordinator, and he had spent time at North Carolina last year. He was at Missouri in 2018. He's bounced around early in his career from James Madison, Missouri State, Boise State, and Arizona State. So he's been around the college level for quite a while. He now will pair up with Pep Hamilton, who also has a professional background that is now back at Maryland as the offensive coordinator. Now, Pep Hamilton was at Stanford, so this is a strange Stanford-centric show. I apologize, but I digress. Looking at this, we had a question come in from Kurt in Baltimore. How does having NFL experienced coordinators help a program like Maryland? Is there a difference in coaching, a recruiting bump? If you were a head coach, would you go experience or up and comer? I think there's a lot of different angles here, Kurt, to address this question, because I look at the NFL experience, and people, I think, have now mocked the 20-hour rule in the NCAA. And while the NCAA doesn't really have any type of say whatsoever in the day-to-day operation of these programs, and how much is the NCAA going to come down on these teams if they're having their players there for more than 20 hours? I don't know the answer to all of that. I do know this. I got a bachelor's degree in football in college. Like, I learned high-level football in college, but I got a doctorate in the NFL. I really believe the amount of information that you get in the NFL, whether it's understanding defenses, understanding blitz schemes, understanding protections, understanding tendencies, learning how to watch tape, learning situational football more so than you ever experienced in college, because the margins are so dang thin in the NFL. You better master third down. You better master red zone. All of those things, my level of intellect on those aspects went up tenfold when I got to the NFL. And I wasn't there for that long. I was just there for 3 years, but it was exponentially different than when I was in college. That can be favorable or that can be unfavorable as NFL coaches come back to college football. Because I think there is this natural understanding from professional coaches, guys that spend a majority of their careers at the professional ranks. There is this natural thought process that my players already understand the simplest aspects of this plan or this game plan or this practice plan. They might take for granted the fact that the 18-year-old freshman has no clue what it is that you're trying to put on them. I remember the first time I got a college playbook. It was an NFL playbook, to be honest with you. My college coach in college was Mike Shula, who had come from an NFL background. The first time I got that playbook, it was like reading Chinese. It was impossible. And it was, you can change the cadence here. You can adjust the protection here. This is your hot signals. These are your, I was like, this is insane. And then we ended up getting into the season. I realized, it wasn't that bad. I mean, they basically give it to you, you sink or swim. And if you can't swim, they'll dumb it down for you. In the NFL, you don't have that luxury. If you can't figure it out, there's the bus ticket. Go get in the front because it's over. But I look at the ways NFL guys teach compared to the way college kids need to be taught sometimes can be really, really challenging. Now, you have guys like Jim Harbaugh that had a ton of success in college before going to the NFL, where he had a ton of success at San Francisco, before going back to college at Michigan and having a ton of success, and now moving on to the Los Angeles Chargers. And so far, albeit one season, having a ton of success. Some guys can easily make that adjustment year to year. We'll see how it happens for Matt Rule. Ton of success in college, went to the NFL, not so great. Now back in college, so far, we've seen progress made year to year in his first couple seasons there in Lincoln. It will be interesting to see what happens with Maryland. It will be interesting to see what happens with North Carolina. It will be interesting to see what happens at Stanford, because it is very, very different. The type of football understanding, the type of situational understanding that players have at the college level versus the way players consume it at the NFL level. You have to dumb it down significantly. It's not because the guys you have are unintelligent. It's just because it might be the first time they've ever seen anything like this. And in the professional ranks, you've seen it hundreds of times by the time your coach is installing it for the 14th time that season. So I will be curious as more and more college coaches are going to the NFL. That means more and more openings are available on college teams for NFL coaches to come back and fill those voids. Will it be met with success, or will it be met with challenges? I don't know the answer to that just yet, but there's a million different examples this year that we should monitor to see which direction some of these programs might be heading. And one last thought on the topic as well. College is becoming more and more like the NFL every day. I'm not suggesting that we are going to implement some salary cap and we're going to have high-priced quarterbacks. Those aspects are already kind of here. I'm not the biggest proponent of talking about NIL and the amount of money that guys are receiving in NIL on this program. I think it turns you off, and to be honest with you, in some ways it turns me off as well. But I look at how our game is now being structured like NFL organizations, and we have closed that gap significantly. There's a reason why there are GMs. There's a reason why there's position coaches and analysts and all these additional roles, player personnel representatives at the high school level and at the college level. You have a player personnel department at almost every significant school. I'm not talking about your recruiting department. Back in the day, it was like two guys that looked at tape all day long, and then if they liked the tape of one player, they'd pass it on to the next guy who would take a peek at it. And then they'd pass it on to the position coach, and if the position coach liked it, they'd pass it on to the head coach. That's kind of the way the recruiting process went back in the day. Now you have about 30 people that might be involved in your player personnel department that are constantly scouting portal entries and high school players and their own players as to whether or not they want to retain the guys that might be asking for additional value by way of NIL. So we are becoming more and more like the NFL, and that might turn you off. Fair, but it also might intrigue you to know that the NFL is the best of the best of the best. Yes, albeit in some ways stale, especially on game day, still the best quality of football. And if we can close that gap between college and the NFL with the quality of football we see between the white lines, that's going to be a huge positive for the sport in the future. Moving into our mailbag, we've had a bunch of great questions. Continue to submit these questions to us via our social media at alwayscfb. You can do it on Twitter. You can do it on Instagram. You can just submit them to me at Greg McElroy. All that is fine. So just submit those questions that you have whenever you feel like, and we'll get to them because we're going to start continuing to just knock out tons of mailbag questions, especially when they're as good as the ones that have been sent in today. We'll start with Dave from Louisville. The NCAA stopped Colorado and Syracuse from playing. In case you were wondering, that those two were trying to play basically have a mixed squad week of practices and kind of like a game at the end of it. So essentially doing spring practice together for a percentage of spring practice, which I thought would have been great. I love that Fran Brown and Deion Sanders are trying to do that. It'd be amazing. Mike Gundy then went on to say that if Oklahoma and Oklahoma State played in the spring, that'd be amazing. So back to Dave's question, do you see college spring football evolving by 2026? Even if it's joint practices, do you think people would watch those? And if the NCAA says steadfast on eliminating that from the possibility, do you think it is just another push for football to split from the NCAA? First of all, football is essentially already split from the NCAA. So we already know that, okay? Yes, do they have some role in policing what goes on with football programs? Yes, that's still there. But for the most part, the NCAA doesn't run football. Football runs football. So we know the answer to the final question that you asked. The next question, Mike Gundy talking about Oklahoma and Oklahoma State playing each other in a spring bedlam. Here's what I hate about this. Okay. Now, I liked the idea of how he pitched it. He pitched playing a game in Stillwater one weekend, and then the following weekend they play it in Norman. So 1 week they're at Stillwater, 1 week they're in Norman. That way you each have a home and home every spring, and then you can charge $25 for tickets that both schools could put towards their NIL budgets. I like that. I wouldn't hate it if that money went to charity as well. If it wanted to go do whatever you want to do with the tickets and all this stuff would be great. He went on to say, quote, "We get tired of practicing against each other. It's not going to be a live game." That's right. He said that. A live game. Well, I don't know what Oklahoma Venables would like to say, but I would be concerned with making it live just because of injury. Okay. End quote, by the way. This is where this stuff drives me crazy. I like the concept of reigniting a rivalry between Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, right? I love that. I want that to happen. I wish we could find a way to do it in the regular season, but like we found out with Texas and Texas A&M, sometimes egos and hurt feelings play way too much of a role than just doing what's right for both schools or for both fan bases. We saw the same with Missouri and Kansas. Like, we've seen this before. Now, they are now playing against each other. All those teams are playing against each other, but feelings get hurt when it comes to realignment and who moves there and who moves there and what have you. Can it get solved? Should, but it's going to require someone to check their ego. We will see where that goes. Here's the problem, though, with what Mike Gundy just said. We now consider Bedlam, right? Bedlam, that rivalry, is on the short list of my favorite rivalries. Is it for you? Because I love it. You don't have to have any interest whatsoever in Oklahoma or Oklahoma State football to know that that's a really special one. And the stakes of that game and the excitement that game is delivered from time to time and the chaos that game is delivered from time to time. Like, I love Bedlam. I grew up with Bedlam. To think that Bedlam and the way it's perceived in my brain as a top 5 game in the sport on an annual basis, to see it now watered down to the point in which you have not full tackle spring game thud style practices, I can't allow that to happen. I would rather not have it than to have it watered down. Like, for me, I love Dr. Pepper. Right? I love it. It's like my favorite drink. I'm from Texas. Like, Dr. Pepper I love it. I grew up with it. I drink it all the time. It's the go-to. If you told me that, Greg, you can have a Dr. Pepper, but guess what? You have to put 50% of your Dr. Pepper, you need to fill it with water. Yeah, I'm good. I'm not gonna drink it. That's kind of gross. I'd rather just not have it. You know what I mean? Like, no, I don't want to take something that's great and make it worse. The Jets and the Giants, for instance, they do this game in the preseason of the NFL every year. It's the third preseason game, which is the game where traditionally the starters play the most time. Usually play 2.5, 3 quarters. And it's the Snoopy Bowl. It's there at MetLife Stadium. Like, I played in it 3 times. And I'll tell you this, like, I don't think anyone really cares if the Jets or the Giants win the third preseason game. Like, okay, they might talk about it on New York sports radio, but no one really cares because it doesn't matter. Like, preseason doesn't matter. And guess what? Spring football doesn't matter. You know what matters? Not ruining something that was already great. And that's Bedlam. Because at some point, Bedlam will return. Let's not water it down in the process. Like I said, like the concept, appreciate the thought, and appreciate the creativity. But please, we're good. I do like, however, what's gone down with what Deion Sanders and Fran Bowen were trying to do. Now, I don't love the idea of 2 Power 5s playing against each other. That doesn't do a whole lot for me. We see these joint practices in the NFL all the time. When the Denver Broncos are playing the Atlanta Falcons in the preseason, they have a week's worth of work against each other. Does anyone really care? No, because Atlanta doesn't have a rivalry with Denver. It doesn't matter. It's the NFL also. Do I really care that much about Syracuse playing Colorado? Not particularly, no. But I do think there is a way that if we're going to get creative with how we approach spring football, we can do it for a lot of really positive benefits that can be created. Like, Syracuse is not going to benefit from playing Colorado, and vice versa. They might get quality competition, good reps against real live teams and real capable teams that are maybe capable of exposing a weakness or two. That'd be great. But you know what would be really beneficial is if you had a local Power 5 team that would be willing to play in the spring, a team that is maybe locally relevant that's in the G5 or in the FCS. So I'll give you a couple examples. We've talked already about Oklahoma State. We'll start with them. Oklahoma State, you now are playing Tulsa in the spring. That's your spring game. Oklahoma, there's only one FBS. I don't think you want to play Oral Roberts in Oklahoma. I don't think they even have a football team. But guess what? You could play North Texas. North Texas, as far as proximity is concerned, pretty close. I know there's been examples too where Oklahoma State has played Tulsa in the regular season and vice versa. So in years in which they're playing that team in the regular season, you wouldn't want to play them in the spring. But in years that they're not, guess what? That's your spring game opponent. What does this do? Well, it gives your starters an opportunity to see how they stack up against lesser competition. And it also gives Tulsa, their players, an opportunity to swing and punch up against one of the blue blood programs in the state. If you're Georgia, you'd play Georgia Southern. If you're Ohio State, you'd play Toledo. If you're Alabama, you'd play UAB, whatever the circumstances may be. Find an FBS team that is within close proximity to you, and you play them. If you're in the Power 5, you play a G5. And if you're in the FCS and you get the opportunity to go play up, awesome. That'd be great. I think it'd be great for the community. I think it'd be great for the fans. I think it'd be great for both the Power 5 program, and I think it'd be great for the G5 program. So if we're trying to get creative with how we reshape the spring football calendar, I think that is one thing that we could potentially look to in the future that would be very beneficial to multiple levels. Let's go next to Mike from Dayton. Mike asked the question, do you believe Julian Sayin will be the quarterback at Ohio State? And is there extra pressure on him because the Buckeyes are the defending champs? Great question, Mike. Now, Ohio State, for the 4th year in a row, will have a different starting quarterback. It's pretty amazing when you think about the success of Ohio State. The last time they had a guy start multiple years was CJ Stroud. That was a long time ago, right? So it's been a while. They went from Stroud. They had Will Howard last year. The year before they had Kyle McCord. And then now it's going to be one of 3 guys. And a lot of us coming into the season, or coming into the spring season, we're under the assumption there's going to be Julian Sayin. Well, by all accounts, it's not really the way it's working out right now. Now, Julian Sayin, by all accounts, did not have a great scrimmage last week. Sounds like kind of struggled on Saturday. That doesn't mean you need to freak out, but it is the first extended scrimmage of the spring, and the expectation level of Julian Sayin was nowhere near what we ended up getting. And that is a little bit concerning. Now, on the other side, Lincoln Kienholz, who is also in the mix for this starting quarterback role, played some a couple years ago, most notably in the Missouri game in the Cotton Bowl there at the end of the season. He's played a little bit. He had a pretty consistent day. So it sounds like he had a pretty good day. You also have the freshman Tavian St. Clair that's involved in this quarterback trifecta, if you will. And they've been rotating all throughout the spring so far, and all three guys have gotten some chances to run with the ones. And then they've had some with the twos and the threes as well. But everybody assumed it was going to be Julian Sayin who is going to be the guy. Here's what's concerning here. I'm like I said, I'm not pressing the panic button just yet. I'm not, because I think it's the first scrimmage. Like, the defense is always ahead of the offense in the first scrimmage. Most of the time. Okay. Most of the time that is understandable. And like I said, not pressing the panic button. But given where we were 1 year ago, there is a little bit of reason to be a tiniest bit concerned. Because what was the situation last year when it came to the Oklahoma Sooners? Like last year, what were we saying in the spring about Oklahoma and where their quarterback situation was going to go, right? Well, it was that Jackson Arnold was going to step right in and replace Dillon Gabriel, and there would be not just no drop off, but he's going to be better than what Dillon Gabriel was the year before, right? We all said that this 5-star can't miss, number one recruit at the position from his class, he's going to go right in, and the sky's the limit. Well, what happened a couple games into Jackson Arnold's debut season as the starting quarterback? Well, he was benched. Why? Because he was pressing. And when he was pressing, he made mistakes. And when those mistakes happened, it ultimately put them way behind the 8 ball, most notably early on in the game against Tennessee. So while I'm not yet at the point where I'm super concerned about Julian Sayin, all I'm saying is if he doesn't clean it up in the next scrimmage and the scrimmage after that, and then clean it up throughout the summer and then clean it up a little bit throughout fall camp, then it's just something to be mindful of. We've seen the pressure get to one 5-star plus super recruit, Jackson Arnold, just a year ago. I hope it doesn't happen for Julian Sayin. But with social media and with the pressure and with coming off a national championship, there is pressure. And it is worth noting that it has had a drastic impact on guys in the past. It might not for Julian Sayin. Hopefully it doesn't. But it has had an impact on guys who had the world expected of them when they were stepping into a starting role. So just something to monitor, and we'll keep track. If he has a great scrimmage on Saturday, we will be the first ones to talk about it next Monday. Certainly hope that's the case. That would be tremendous. So we'll see, and we will keep you up to date with what's going on at the Ohio State quarterback situation. We'll go next to Stan in Texas. There's so much hype around Arch and that he's a stud. But I'm wondering, is it too much? Is he really just automatically going to be one of the nation's best quarterbacks immediately? Let's talk about this from a few different angles, right? And it's not fair to Arch. It's not fair to his family and his family's legacy. But let's be real here when we assess what Arch Manning is going to be. You have Archie, you got Peyton, you got Eli. That family legacy is outrageous, is it not? He has the weight of the world on his shoulders as a result of what came before him. But also because who is the first family of football? Who is commonly referred to as the first family of football? It's the Manning family, correct? So when you go out there and you take center stage at a place like Texas, all eyes are going to be on you. And if you listen to the early reports out of spring football, Arch is lighting it up. He's lighting it up. People are excited. He's pushing the ball down the field. He's creating big plays off play action. He's got really good, talented supporting cast around him at wide receiver and at running back. They're thrilled already with what they're seeing so far from the offensive line that need to be revamped. The expectations for Arch are significant, but there is a possibility. There's a possibility that they are not high enough. It's possible. I don't know for sure. All I know is that no one has been better prepared to take over for a situation. No situation for a guy with this much hype has ever been better. Arch got there. At that time, he was a young quarterback. He arrived at Texas as the third string guy. And when you're the third string guy, you're likely not going to have to play. I mean, more often than not, the third string guy is not going to start at any point. The third string guy is never going to get a meaningful rep, hopefully, if everything goes according to plan. And at Texas, knowing the personnel they have along the offensive line and the fact that they're not going to put Quinn Ewers in obvious run situations, like he probably wasn't going to play. So you know what Arch was able to do that first year, a couple years back? He was able to focus on him. He was able to get better. He's able to get more physically mature. He's able to allow the game to process faster, everything to think faster, to have a better grasp of what they're trying to do offensively with the plays he was trying to run. So he had a year to focus on him, which I think for a player is invaluable. So beneficial. Then you have year two. Not only did he get to make a couple spot starts against lesser competition, but he performed pretty well in those spot starts and then had a role in a package that he was utilized in at times throughout the season. So he's already seen real live competition against high quality competition. So we've seen that. And now he gets an entire off season in year number 3 to be the starting quarterback and to develop chemistry and continuity with a really talented supporting cast. If I had a son and I were trying to make sure that my son was put in the best possible situation to find success, I would say, let's follow the Arch Manning blueprint. This is perfect. So I think he's going to be sensational. I think he's been built up the right way. I don't think he cares about social media. I don't think he cares about creating opportunities for himself via NIL. He doesn't need it, that's for sure. I think he exclusively cares about becoming the best version of himself when he steps onto the field as the Texas quarterback. That's all he cares about. And I think when you have that focused, narrow vision of what you want to accomplish, that will allow you to become the best version of yourself as a player. So I think he's going to be amazing. And am I going to be the one that has to eat crow if he doesn't play so well? Sure, perhaps. But I don't really care. I'll roll the dice with Arch Manning. Let's go next to Bob in Rochester. Question about Notre Dame quarterback competition. Do you think Carr has a higher ceiling than Steve Angeli, and the staff may take a chance on him early against Miami and A&M, or do you think they will play it safe with Angeli and gradually work Carr into the lineup the way Texas did with Arch Manning? Great question, Bob. And I've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I've been to practice. I've watched CJ Carr throw. I've watched Steve Angeli throw. I've been around those guys and see how they interact with their teammates. Like, I spent a lot of time with this program. So I feel like I have a more adequate grasp on the depth of Notre Dame's roster than maybe any roster in the country. Just having such access to them throughout the playoff run of 2024. I will say this. Yes, CJ Carr is extremely gifted as a thrower. Extremely. You watch him throw, the way the ball comes off his hand, the way he can turn it over, the tight spiral, pinpoint accuracy. I remember a moment just in practice where I'm sitting there watching him, and the goal, they were practicing red zone passes. They were practicing throws inside the 10-yard line, and the goal was to throw it just underneath the upright. That, for those of you that don't know, when you are a quarterback and you're having to work the end line, the back of the end zone, the goal is to throw it high where only your guy can get it. Low, and that could get tipped, and that's when problems happen. So the goal for quarterbacks is to try to hit that crossbar so that your guy can go up and make a play on the ball. Well, I'm sitting there watching CJ Carr, and it's like, boom, 2 inches under the crossbar. Boom, 3 inches under the crossbar. Boom, right at the crossbar. I mean, it was impressive with great velocity, great spin, very catchable for the opposing wide receiver. That being said, I don't care about practice. It's like what Allen Iverson said. Practice? Practice? I don't care about practice. Okay, if I want to go win a quarterback skills competition, I probably last year would have taken CJ Carr over not just Steve Angeli, but I also probably would have taken him over? Riley Leonard, who took Notre Dame to the national championship. But it's not about a skills competition. It's about how you perform when live bullets are flying. And with all due respect to Carr's upside, I think it's there. I think it's obvious. He's got really, really gifted skill set. I've seen Steve Angeli do it. Like, I've seen Steve Angeli go out there on the field in the Sun Bowl 2 years ago and light it up. I've seen Steve Angeli thrust into action when Riley Leonard was getting a concussion test against Penn State, against a ferocious pass rush in Penn State and one of the best defenses in the country. I saw Steve Angeli go into the lineup and just methodically, right down the field, accurately carving up a defense that prior to that possession haven't given up a thing. I've seen Steve Angeli. And who's to say that Steve Angeli's ceiling, when the real lights are on, isn't outrageously high? We don't know that. We've seen him make one start, and it was a couple years ago. What if, when we fast forward to this year, Steve Angeli has some awakening, and all of a sudden he's the second coming of Joe Burrow? You remember now, Joe Burrow at Ohio State was just a guy. Joe Burrow in his first year at LSU. People don't want to remember this, but he was just a guy. Actually, about as average as the day is long. Well, Steve Angeli, up to this point of his career, solid, just a guy. But maybe there's another level in there that we just don't know about. Because when the game flipped in Joe Burrow's final season, when he got a chance to run an offense that was built for him, look what happened. He went from being a guy that was potentially undrafted to the first overall pick and the Heisman Trophy winner and a national champion. Maybe that's in there for Steve Angeli. Because if you watch Joe Burrow throw in practice, he's not going to throw it probably as impressively as CJ Carr throws it in practice. But you watch him throw it in the game, and it's like, wow, that's a different guy. So we'll see what happens with Steve Angeli, but I would not rule out him becoming the starting quarterback based on what we've seen on game day and how efficient he has become at times when thrust into the lineup. Let's go next to Bruce. Can we come up with a playoff seeding that minimizes rematches? It's not like the difference between the 11th ranked and the 12th ranked teams is really that scientific. How about 4 regions with 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4 seeds like NCAA basketball? Well, I don't know how you avoid rematches. Like, in a perfect world, Bruce, we're on the same page. I don't really necessarily want to see teams playing for the third time in the college football playoff. It doesn't do anything for me. I've seen that outcome. I've seen that matchup. I've seen that result. I happen to like unique matchups that we hadn't seen in a really long time. That is what I would prefer. But I don't know how you do it. Unless you want to completely shake things up week to week to week, you can't predict who's going to win the games. But the only way to reward teams and to make sure the regular season's impact is maximized is to rank teams 1 through 12. based exclusively on what you did in the regular season. Like last year, I don't like how they did it last year. I don't like the top 4 seeds were conference champions when teams 3 and 4 probably weren't as good as teams 5 and 6. Like it should just be ranked 1 through 12 based on what you've accomplished in the 12 games, the 13 games that you participated in the regular season. Now, you win your conference, yeah, those 5 teams are guaranteed a spot, but you're not guaranteed a bye. So I like to see 1 through 12, and if we expand to 14, 1 through 14. If we expand to 16, then 1 through 16, so be it. But I can't prioritize minimizing rematches in favor of rewarding teams for having an outstanding regular season run. Does that make sense? So difficult question to figure out because I just don't know if I have an adequate answer. Let's go next to Brooks in Alabama. I know there's a quarterback competition going on in Tuscaloosa. That's right. It seems like Ty Simpson is in the driver's seat. How would you evaluate the upside of Simpson at quarterback this year for the Tide? Right now, based on my understanding of what's going on in Tuscaloosa, is that Ty has had a solid camp. He is in firm control of the number 1 job so far. That the other 2, between Austin Mack and Keelan Russell, those are the ones that are kind of competing for that number 2 spot right now. And then once we get into the summer, maybe that competition is extended. Maybe one of those guys makes a leap and makes this thing super competitive down the stretch. I don't think we're going to have an answer anytime soon. At least I don't think it's going to make sense publicly for them to come out and to endorse one guy as the starter for fear that the fact that there's only 3 guys right now on scholarship, you lose one of the other 2 guys. Now you're down to 2 and you're back in the portal for a guy that doesn't have a great feel for the system. If I were in charge of this quarterback competition, this thing's going all the way until week 1. As long as I can potentially string it out, I would string it out. The other thing I'd say too is that by all accounts, the most improved position on Alabama's team this upcoming season might be wide receiver. Now, there's a lot of people, there's a ton of buzz right now that's out there about what they've received from Isaiah Horton, the transfer from Miami. He's big, he's physical. They believe that he is a guy that can take the top off the defense and create big plays. He's been very difficult to defend for a pretty good secondary so far this year. By all accounts, last Friday, a couple touchdowns in the scrimmage against the top team defense. He had a couple of very contested catches there as well. So I think there's a lot to like about some of the progress that's been made at wide receiver, because let's be real. Last year, wide receiver was a huge headache for Alabama. A huge headache. They had guys that were undersized. They had guys that really didn't fit any specific role. If you look at how Alabama likes to structure their team, or you look at how Alabama's staff, Ryan Grubb, their offensive coordinator, how he wants to structure, he wants a guy that is going to play the Z receiver. He wants a guy that can play the X receiver, and they're going to have a slot guy. Well, we know Ryan Williams is going to be your Z. We know Jeremy Bernard's going to be your slot. We know Isaiah Horton's going to be your X. That's a pretty good spot to start. So whoever the quarterback is, and at this point, if I had to bet, it'd be Ty Simpson. They're going to take the field with a really improved supporting cast, by all accounts, with what we've seen through the first 8 practices at spring football. Let's go next to George in Michigan. Curious your thoughts on if 2024 will be the outlier season for Michigan. If the QB is right, I have a hard time seeing them not win double-digit games. Okay, let's think about where they were last year. All right, 8-5 last year. They ended up winning the last 3 games. Now the quarterback position is, how could it not improve, right? I mean, they're going to be better at quarterback. I don't care if it's Mikey Keene, who I think has a really good shot to be the guy early on, or if they go with Bryce Underwood from day one, that's fine. They're going to be improved at the quarterback spot for sure. Compared to what they had last year and the carousel that they had to navigate through, is a huge problem. I think their running backs have a chance to be better. Last year, they were all right. I mean, Khalil Bowling's had some great moments, but I think their running back depth has a chance to be better. If you really look at their entire roster, the only position that I think could regress is tight end, where it's going to be hard to replace Colston Loveland. He might be the best tight end in the class outside of what we've seen from Tyler Warren at Penn State. So I think you look at kind of where they're at, look at the defense, there's some question marks on there. You lose Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. You lose Josiah Stewart there off the edge. You lose Will Johnson, who was out most of the year. I get that, but did have a couple of big moments at times last year with pick sixes. But we saw a big mass exodus from 23 to 24. So do you think that's just going to continue? I mean, look at how many guys left off that national championship winning roster. You lost Sayin still, Barrett, Colson, Jenkins, Harrell, McGregor, Josh Wallace. I mean, they lost a ton of guys off that group. So I'm pretty optimistic about what things look like for Michigan this upcoming year. I think the schedule is very difficult, but at the same time, I happen to think with how they finished and the obvious improvement at the positions of need on offense, they could be in line to get back into striking distance of winning the Big Ten. I think it's probably still a year, maybe two away from winning the Big Ten, but I'd be surprised if they aren't a lot more competitive, especially with what they could do on offense this upcoming year when compared to what they had last year. Let's go next to Don in Virginia. Tennessee's over-under win total is 9.5. That's the same as Georgia and Alabama. I know they're not going to have a major fall off or anything, but they didn't add much on offense, and they're losing a lot of talent from what was a great defensive front. A win total feels really high to me, and I don't see Tennessee being great in 2025. What do you think? Well, I actually think Tennessee's going to be pretty good, and partly because, one, I think Nico Iamaleava really showed some progress at times down the stretch last year. There was a moment there in the midseason where he did have some misses, really the early part of the season. First month and a half of the year, there were some big misses. He didn't hit some downfield throws. He had some problems with some intermediate accuracy that got cleaned up and improved quite a bit down the stretch. And part of that had to do with, I think, him just getting comfortable, him not running around like crazy, the first sign of pressure, and the offensive line that at times last year was a little inconsistent. They had a great run game last year, though. I don't know how they're going to be able to replace Dylan Sampson. He was a superstar. He was crazy productive. And I look at the wide receiver spot, I have a bunch of new faces at wide receiver. You look at the offensive line, it's going to be a little different from where it was last year. And you might even have a true freshman starting at tackle. I think it's likely you're going to have a true freshman starting at tackle. So I do think the offense is going to be solid, but it will be almost entirely dependent on progress made by Nico Iamaleava. The defense on the other side, there's a lot of pieces gone off that defense. You look at their defensive line, a lot of great players gone. You look at their corners, that's a problem position right now. Jermod McCoy got banged up. Ricky Gibson is flirting with the portal. Who knows exactly who all is going to be back? I think it's too early to tell, but that's a position group defensively along the line of scrimmage that is not easy to replace game-changing players, and they had a handful of those guys last year. So that's the look at the roster type of situation. But let's go a step further. Let's look at the schedule. Okay, because if you don't love Tennessee winning double digits in the regular season, you must think their schedule's a beast. Well, let's go through it. Syracuse, that's a neutral site game. Syracuse lost a lot. I think Tennessee's going to be heavily favored in that game. All right, we'll give them that one. Georgia, tough game. Georgia's got a lot to replace, though. Georgia's got a lot of unknowns. Now, I think they're going to be the best defense in the conference, but you look at what they have offensively, I don't know for sure that they're going to be great along the offensive line. I don't know for sure that they're going to be a group that can now run the football with a lot of efficiency like they weren't able to do last year. I don't know the answer to that. I still think Georgia probably wins that game. Let's just call it a toss-up, all right? So you got one toss-up right now. You're at Mississippi State. By the way, I skipped over a couple non-conference games because there's no point in even talking about those right now. I'm going to, in the preseason, give those games to Tennessee. At Mississippi State. Mississippi State was one of the worst teams in the SEC last year. I think you'll get that one. Arkansas is at home. If Arkansas were on the road, we know that would have been a difficult game. But I think that's one that's been circled. I would expect Tennessee to handle their business in that game, especially at Neyland Stadium. You're at Alabama. All right, toss-up game. So right now we have two toss-ups, Bama and Georgia. You're at Kentucky. Kentucky's in the midst of a complete rebuild. Who knows what Kentucky's going to be? All right, I still think Tennessee is the team that I'd favor in that game, given the fact that Kentucky just has so many new faces. There's not going to be a lot of continuity from last year moving over to this year. Oklahoma comes to you. Oklahoma, I think, is going to be better. I think Oklahoma has a chance to be pretty good. But will they be good enough to go to Neyland and knock off Tennessee? I don't know if I'm going that far just yet. And then finally at Florida. All right, at Florida will be a really tough game, especially late in the year. I can see Tennessee losing that game, so let's just give them the loss. So I got one loss to Florida. I got 2 toss-ups, Georgia at home at Alabama. And then if you want to put Oklahoma in the toss-up category as well, I don't think it is one, but I think that you can make that case. That right there, you got 8 wins coming out of the gate. That means I only have to win 2 of my difficult games with Tennessee's talent and with their advantage that they have playing at home. Yeah, I'll take my chances there. I think Tennessee is going to be pretty good. And while maybe their roster won't be as good as it was a year ago, their record might actually be better in some ways than it was a year ago. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to ask all of you guys to like, to rate, and to subscribe to the show. Really appreciate the support you've shown us. If you can just subscribe to the podcast platform, whatever the podcast platform is that you use, subscribe there. It will automatically populate in your downloads on a day-to-day basis. So every time we put out a new show, you guys will get it if you subscribe on the podcast platform. But you can also check us out on the ESPN College Football YouTube channel. That should be helpful as well. So for all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.